Hello guys, welcome back. In this video, let us see about one more new interesting concept with hands-on lab. Now, in this video, we will discuss about integrating serverless applications with a decoupling. What a decoupling service. So for this lab, we're gonna move with SQS Queue. So this is the AWS service that we're gonna learn from this video, much more hands-on in this video by performing hands-on decoupling multiple serverless services. So for this, let's move on with a need. Let's say I'm maintaining a library where in that library I have multiple coders are practicing there. So whenever coder is entering into the library, I provided a unique ID for them in order to identify them. So whenever a coder is entering into the library, they need to provide the details like the coder ID, they need to provide, and automatically my app will gather the timestamp or record the timestamp for the coder and some other details. Let's say it will gather. Now, what I am expecting is I want to store that data. I want to store that data inside any one of the store, inside any one of the NoSQL database. So for that, I have a service that is already available in AWS, that is a DynamoDB. Now, in this DynamoDB, actually, I'll store that data. I'll store that data inside this DynamoDB. Before storing that data, I even process that data. To process that data, I'm using a Lambda function. To process that data, I'm using a Lambda function. So for this lab, in order to generate the website related content, that is the users or my coders related login details, I'm using one more Lambda function to generate some JSON script. Now, this Lambda function acts as a producer where it will produce the data, and that data I need to put in one more AWS serverless application service, serverless service, that is a Lambda, where this will process the data and that will put the data or store the data inside my database, that is DynamoDB. Now I am searching for a service where that acts as a decoupling service, AWS decoupling service, and that need to take the messages from my producers and that need to put the messages into my consumers or push the messages into my consumers. So like that, I'm expecting a service or decoupling service like that I'm expecting in Amazon. So during that time, I noticed a service. What is that? Amazon Queue, Amazon SQS Queue. By using this Amazon SQS Queue, we can able to fulfill our needs. That is, we can able to put whatever the producer produced data into our consumer. So how do we put that? We're gonna see in this lab. Here in SQS, you will initially create a queue in order to store the messages which are generated by your producer serverless application. In this case, it is a Lambda function, right? Yeah. So then you create a Lambda function to consume whatever the messages which are produced into this SQS queue, right? Yeah. Then after, in order to consume, what you do? We will provide or we will configure a Lambda trigger for this Lambda function. For this consumer, we will create a Lambda function. So we can able to consume whatever the messages that we put into this SQS queue. and there we can able to process our data, and we can able to store our data inside our DynamoDB by writing some code in this Lambda function, consumer Lambda function, right? Yeah. In this way, you can use this SQS queue to process your every message at least once. Let's say it might happen if you provide a error formatted message to this SQS queue, then what happens, sir? Do this Lambda function will process that data as well? The answer for that is no. So during that time, if we provide any messages to this queue and that message is unable to process by using this consumer Lambda function, in that case, that message will lead to unprocessed, sir, right? Yeah. So how do we can even secure, or how do we can store those messages even in another queue for further process? We can even do that by using dead letter queue. What is that? That is a DLQ option. By using dead letter queue, you can say in simply DLQ. By using this dead letter queue option, you can process each and every message at least once. Let's say if I put a message into this from this producer where that message is not in the correct format, then obviously this consumer won't process that message, right? Yeah. So during that scenario, that message won't be deleted and that will be moved to this dead letter queue. Even this dead letter queue is also one of the SQS queue only. We can even move back to this dead letter queue and we can analyze the data and we can further process that data as well, right? Yeah. So now in this lab, since we are focusing on decoupling services in AWS, that is AWS SQS Queue, we're gonna create our SQS queue and we're gonna create our dead letter queue as well. Now let's not waste our time, let's start the lab. Now you can see I have already logged into my AWS management console. Here I have already provided the setup that is required for you, except this SQS queue. These queues I want to show you setup and usage of them. So that's why for this lab I haven't created these, but I have created a producer Lambda function for you, consumer Lambda function for you, and DynamoDB data store also for you. So let me show you those and let me explain those. First, I want to show you that DynamoDB. Since there I want to store my data, right? Yeah. So I'm searching for DynamoDB and now I'm opening this service. I've already created a DynamoDB table for you for this lab. Now I'm opening the tables. You can see this is the check-in data, right? Yeah. So in order to monitor my students check-in data, I am using this check-in data table in DynamoDB. I am exploring the items, table items in this check-in data. You can see currently it has a 0 items, right? Yeah. So we have already pre-provided you the DynamoDB table. Now I've already provided the Lambda functions as well for you. That is a producer as well as consumer Lambda functions. Now I want to show you those as well. Now I'm opening this Lambda. Inside your Lambda functions, actually there you can see this is a producer Lambda function where it will produce the data, and this is a consumer Lambda function, it will consume the data. Even I'll show you the code which is present under this producer Lambda function. Now you can see the code which is present under this producer Lambda function where it first initially creates a resource connection with SQS. You can see that connection is available here And here we need to provide the queue related URL that even I provide after creating my SQS queue. That will get after creating your SQS queue, that I will provide after creating my SQS queue. By using that URL only, we connect to that SQS queue and we will send our messages to that SQS queue by using this send message function. Here I am providing the message body as JSON format of this message variable, where this message variable will hold this JSON content. You can see I am providing the coder ID, sample coder ID and spot ID and timestamp I am providing. The current timestamp I am providing. That's it. I am just providing coder ID. Who is the coder? Who is just entering, and the current timestamp I am providing, and I'm providing this spot ID as an additional value, right? Yeah. And I'm sending them to where? To my SQS queue, whatever the queue URL that I'm going to provide, right? Yeah. So whenever I send my message to that queue, that will be stored into my queue. Then after that, queue will trigger to my consumer lambda function, that is this. In this consumer lambda function, actually I have written the code in order to put my data or message into my DynamoDB. You can see by using a Boto3 library, that is a resource, I have connected to my SQS, and I have also connected to the resource that is a DynamoDB. And based on event that this lambda function will get, it will fetch the records which are present under the events. That is, if record is present under the event, then only it will run. So then if records are there, it will fetch each and every record. From that record, it will fetch the body, and if the body contains only coder ID, if the body contains coder ID, then only it will execute this. That is putting that item into my DynamoDB table, that is a check-in data. Let's say if my data does not contain this coder ID, then it will print or it will raise this error. It will raise this error and our Lambda execution got stopped. You can see at last it will return 200 code, that is success code, that our Lambda function got run successfully. So by using that, you can able to verify this. Now we have everything ready, right? Yeah. We have our DynamoDB available, that is this, and we have this consumer Lambda function is there, and we have this producer Lambda function is also there. Now, what is our task? We need to configure this decoupling service, that is SQS queue, to store the messages which are produced by using producer function and trigger this consumer Lambda function. And I need to create one more queue for this dead letter queue storing, right? Yeah. So let us first create this normal queue, then we'll create a dead letter queue. Now I'm going for SQS. So that's why I'm searching for SQS. Since I'm expecting to create a SQS queue, I'm opening this SQS. From here, let us create a SQS queue. To create a queue, you have here, you can see the option that is a queues option is there. Currently, I do not have any queues, so no queues are there. Now I'm expecting to create a queue. Now, what is this a queue type? You want standard or FIFO? I want currently the standard type queue with a queue name. You can provide any name of your queue and how much time you want to store your messages inside this queue. I want to store for 60 seconds. That's enough for me. And I'm moving on with the default encryption options and access policy also. Currently, I'm not changing anything. You can see even I'm not providing this dead letter queue as well. After creating my dead letter queue, I'll attach that to here, right? Yeah. Now, even after creating this queue also, you can able to edit this and you can able to attach this dead letter queue as well. Now, I'm just creating the queue with the provided configurations. What are they? That is the queue name we provided, and the configuration, that is visibility time, that is 60 seconds. And simply that's how I'm just creating the queue. So by using these two configurations, I simply created my queue. Now you can tell me from this architecture, after creating this queue, what I need to do? I need to provide this queue URL to this Lambda function, right? Then only the data generated from this Lambda function will put into this queue, right? Yeah. So let's copy the URL from this SQS queue and paste there. You can say I'm copying this URL, and now I'm opening the Lambda function. I searched for Lambda, and now I'm opening this Lambda function in another new tab. There, inside which function? Inside this producer function, I need to provide the URL for my Lambda, that is SPS queue URL here. Since this producer will put the data, right? Here I am providing this queue related URL. I provided, right? Yeah. Now I am deploying. That is nothing but saving this code. You can see successfully updated this producer function, right? Yeah. Now, so whenever this producer produce the data and put the message into this queue, to whom this queue will trigger? This consumer, right? Yeah. So we need to even configure a trigger to this Lambda function, right? Yeah. Consumer Lambda function. Let's do that. Let's add this triggering directly from our SQS queue. Now I'm opening this SQS queue, that is Q1, that's what just now I created. Now I'm opening this Lambda triggers, right? Now I'm configuring a Lambda trigger. Currently there is no triggers are there. Now I'm configuring this Lambda trigger. So whenever you click it there, now you just enter to this. Here you need to provide to which Lambda function you want to trigger. Since I want to trigger this consumer, I have provided this consumer Lambda function. Now I'm just clicking on save, so that this consumer Lambda function trigger got now added successfully. Even you can see under your Q1 Lambda triggers, you can see that here, right? Yeah. So currently it is in creating state. Either it may take a minute. You can see that is enabled now. Now you can even validate it or verify that trigger is created or not directly from your Lambda function. So what is the Lambda function that you provided? Consumer, right? Here you can see that a trigger need to be added. You can see that trigger is added, right? Yeah. So that trigger, SQS trigger is added now successfully to this consumer as well. Now let's move back to our architecture and let's see what we need to do at last. We need to create a SQS queue in order to store our dead letter queues, right? Yeah. So let's create one more SQS queue to store the dead letter queues of our Q1. Now I'm moving back to this queues option. Here you can see whatever the Q1 that we created, that is available here. Now since I'm expecting to create another queue, I'm clicking on create queue. And here I'm providing the queue name as a DQ. Since I am creating it for dead letter queue, you can provide the name as you wish. And I'm moving on with the default configuration simply and creating this queue, so that you can see our dead letter queue was just now created successfully, right? Yeah. Now I'm moving back to our queues. And for this Q1, I want to provide this DQ queue as a dead letter queue. So that's why I'm opening this Q1. And now for this, under this Q1, you can see this dead letter queue option is there. I'm clicking on it. And here, currently there is no dead letter queues are available for this Q1. So that's why I'm editing and providing that DQ as a dead letter queue. You can see even while editing also you can able to provide or configure the visibility timeout and other details as well, but you cannot able to configure that type of your queue. Now let's provide that dead letter queue for this. So where is, yeah, you can see for this dead letter queue option, I'm just enabling it and I'm choosing the queue that is this DQ. That is what I selected. Now I am just saving this. You can see I just saved this message, right? Yeah. So now you can see for our queue as Q1, we have created a queue with Q1 name, and we have even created a dead letter queue for this Q1 to store the error messages which are unable to process by using the consumer. So we have did everything correctly. Now let's validate it. So that's what the thing we left with. So that's why I'm opened this Lambda function, and from here I'm opening the producer to produce some content and verify whether that message reached to this dead letter queue, that is this normal queue or not. Then after, let us validate that message even stored in our DynamoDB or not. So let me open that DynamoDB as well. In another new tab, you can see I have opened this DynamoDB in a new tab, and I'm even opening the tables. And now I'm clicking on explore items. So currently it has 0 items. You can see that. Yeah. So now I'm moving back to this producer Lambda function to produce some content by just clicking on test, so that it will generate me some content and save that content inside. That is this message. It will put into this queue. What is the queue? Q1. Now I'm just clicking on test. So whenever you are running your Lambda function, you must need to provide any event. So now I'm providing event as E1, and I'm moving on with the default event, and I'm just clicking on save. Now I'm just clicking on test. This is a producer Lambda function. Now I'm just clicking on test. You can see the execution happened. And you can see we got HTTP status code as 200. That is, we got the response as a 200. That means it was successfully sent, right? Let's open our DynamoDB and let's load this. Let's reload this. You can see one item got available here. So whatever the coder ID, timestamp, spot ID, details that I have provided inside my Lambda function, that is producer. So those all got stored there, right? Yeah. So how they stored? Whenever this will put the data into this queue, that is this SQS queue, that will receive, this queue will receive the message that will be present under this send and receive messages. That is inside the receive messages, those will be present. And you can even pull that message directly from here or by using other AWS services as well. Currently, we pulled that message by using consumer Lambda function, right? Yes, we pulled or we processed that message by using consumer Lambda function. Let's validate that even after once processing this message also, even that will available here or not. If we try to repoll the message that is already processed, is that available here? No. So if you process a message at least once in SQS queue, you cannot able to get that message again. So our message got successfully processed by using that consumer Lambda function. You can even validate that consumer Lambda function processed that message, and by using this result, that is this DynamoDB store that, right? Yeah. So now let's provide without this coder ID, let's provide an input and test. This is the producer Lambda function. Now I'm simply removing this coder ID and simply deploying this code and simply testing this code to see whether this message, since it's not a coder related data, since I haven't provided coder ID, does it stores in my DynamoDB? As per consumer Lambda function, it won't store. Even I'll show you that consumer Lambda function. As per consumer Lambda function, it won't need to store in my DynamoDB because we did one thing. What is that? inside our code, we have written like that. So if coder ID is not there in our payload body, then what we are doing? We are raising an error, right? This error is visible under your cloud watch. Now I'm opening the cloud watch logs for you previously only to show you, do we have any logs are available there? Now you can see under log groups, even you can check here, do we have any log groups are there? You can see currently we have 3 log groups. Under consumer, you can see consumed data related log groups. So since for the first time it consumed the data, that is coder ID we provided, right? So that is available here. Even you can check. If you check, that is even available here. Then let's try to run this, that is without ID, without coder ID. Let's try to test this and see the error which was generated. Now I'm just clicking on test. You can see the status code is 200. That means it was done successfully. Now let's validate, do that stored in this DynamoDB table or not. Now I'm just reloading it. You can see that was not there. Now I'm opening the CloudWatch logs. I'm just moving back to this CloudWatch logs, and I'm opening this consumer. Here you can see under this CloudWatch logs. Here you can see the CloudWatch logs, where you can see, you can identify that changes. That is, if you observe here, then you can see the error, that is value error. So this is what the error that we provided. So whenever user is not provided any coder ID, then we are raising this error, right? Yeah. So that's why this is raised and the data is not stored in our DynamoDB. So at last, let us provide the different format. Let us provide from producer, let us provide the different format and see whether that will be stored, that this format will be stored or not. Now I'm just removing this, and at last I'm providing this. At last I'm providing this. Now I'm saving or deploying this and testing this as well. So whenever you click on test, then it will be clearly submitted. And let's move back to our DynamoDB and let's reload this to see whether do we got the response or not. Yeah, you can see we got the response as well. You can see it is taking the responses. That means it is accepting that related data as well, right? Yeah. So if that data is not processed in real time, that this might happen. So that's why we use that dead letter queue in order to store the unprocessed messages, and we can even verify that and validate it, and we can analyze and remove that data to our normal queue as well. So this is how you can able to use this SQS service to process your data at least once in between your multiple serverless services, or to integrate multiple AWS services. You can use this SQS queue to process the message at least once. You can use this SQS as a decoupling service in AWS. I hope you understood this video and you understood this hands-on lab with SQS Queue, and you got some knowledge about hands-on implementing your SQS Queue in real time. I hope this video is useful. If you feel this video is useful, then please like, share, subscribe, and hit the bell icon to get the latest updates. Thanks for watching again. See you back in the next video. Until then, bye bye guys.